Just said, it's about bloody time we're going to pay properly. And then of course he came in and he said, oh no. I said, I just made it. He said, oh, now I'll have to bloody do it.
Welcome everyone. Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi mahana kia koutou. Welcome to this meeting of the Safety and Resilience Committee. I'll just begin our meeting with our karakia. Tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki waho, tuia ki roto, tuia ki te here tangata. Ka ronga te pō, ka ronga te ao. Homie, kuie, haniki. We've got a good variety of papers and a great deal of information to go through today. There's sort of two themes that run through the papers we've got today. One is about risk, how to manage risk, how to live with risk. And in fact, it's no accident that we have papers here about both flooding and fires, and indication of more extreme weather events that we're experiencing. The other theme is around communication and engagement with our communities. There've already been media releases last week about the South Dunedin groundwater study and the Lower Tairi floodback risk assessment. And in the papers, there's information about community engagement underway or planned in the Clutha Delta, head of Lake Whakatipu, Lower Tairi, and of course South Dunedin through the South Dunedin Future Programme. Most of the papers, the recommendations are mostly that things just be noted. But there's a great deal of information, and through the noting, that's sort of implying that councillors are comfortable with the direction of travel. So, apologies. We have received apologies from Councillor Forbes and Councillor Scott and Councillor Laws. I could move those. No, Andrew, you're going to move those accepted. Someone second that. Kate, all those in favour? Aye. Thank you very much. Well done. Public forum, we do not have a public forum today. Just to confirm the agenda, we're not proposing any changes to the agenda that has been circulated. So I could move that that's the case. Someone have to confirm that. Thanks, Kate. All those in favour? Aye. All right, agenda confirmed. Declarations of interest, just a reminder that councillors need to stand aside from decision making where a conflict arises. And of course, those interests are publicly available on the council register of interest on the website. We will move on to the confirmation of minutes of the meeting of 8th of November 2023. There. Are there any comments on those minutes? Or they all look good?
Happy to move.
Kate, happy to move. We confirm those. Someone second those. Councillor Weir, all those in favour? Aye. Thank you very much. We move on to item 7 or something like that. Open actions from the resolutions of the committee. Now, there's one there that the previous meeting requested the chair of Otago Civil Defence and Emergency Management writes the relevant minister about coverage of weather radar. Is there any update around that one?
The update on that one is, I'm the chair of that, but it's a joint committee with all the other councils. So before we write, which I'm sure will be fine, we just need to put that through the committee, unfortunately. Yeah. So that is going to happen. We've highlighted that it'll go on the March meeting. Yep. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Robertson. Right, we move on to matters for consideration. So our first paper here is the Dunedin groundwater monitoring and spatial observations. And we're welcoming a number of people up to the front. It looks as though we have Dr. Gavin Palmer, Dr. Jean-Luc Payan, Simon Robertson, and Dr. Simon Cox from GNS Science. Now, I think we will hand over to you to present the paper, and it looks as though there's a presentation coming for us, and then we will be opening that up to any further questions after that. So over to the distinguished panel. Thanks.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm going to present the Southern Indian.
Hold on.
Yeah, push the button.
Is that better now?
Thanks.
So I'm going to present the Southern Indian groundwater report that we presented to council, and Simon Cox, who is a principal scientist at GNS based in Dunedin, is going to cover the main findings of the reports and why it's quite a unique study that's been recently completed. But before some start, I just want to give you the background. So this study don't come out of the blue. It's part of about 20 years of either monitoring or various studies that were released by ORC or GNS in the last 20 years. What I've got on the screen here is just a simplified timeline of the key steps that we progressed through to be where we are today, which is a milestone in understanding the groundwater behavior in Southern Dunedin. In blue on the screen, you've got anything related to the monitoring network, mainly groundwater monitoring. So starting in 2009 with about 4 sites in South Dunedin, and now we operating about 35 sites in the area, and that includes now Harbourside, which is roughly speaking the area between the Oval and Forsyth Borough Stadium. The other key information we've used through that study is very detailed ground levels through LiDAR, and that was captured the last time in 21, and that was a big improvement in the accuracy of the measurements since the previous one, which was captured about 2009. The other thing I want to highlight is the progression in understanding and the level of detail we get from the first study in 2012 to 2014, where someone will cover that, but we can get really very site-specific in the understanding of that behavior of groundwater. And finally, I want to highlight the fact that this work has been also a collaboration between ORC, DCC, but also GNS EQC, University of Otago, Quakecore, which is the University of Canterbury, and Oceania Gold for some of the drilling. So it's been led by ORC, but a lot of groups and organizations have had an input to those different studies and monitoring.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Simon Cox, toko and Noah. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to bring you this groundwater study for South Dunedin. To me, it is applied science in perfection. As a principal scientist from GNS Science, we really see collaboration that goes right from regional council through the science part, through into the South Dunedin Futures and the Dunedin City or an equivalent city type thing. And to me, this has been a perfect example of how well you can do things when there's a need. And the need came in 2015, of course, to understand a bit more about what's going on in South Dunedin. GNS Science got involved in 2016. Claire Curran kind of invited me to come and put my head to the problem. And we installed this groundwater monitoring network. And to be honest, it was like turning on a light switch. We were in the dark. We had no idea what was going on before. And within a year, we had a first idea of exactly what's moving and how much is moving. But now, after 4 years of monitoring, particularly this data set from 2019 to 2023, it's a total game changer. Relatively small investment in science has provided data which now gives us an idea of the future. To me, it's really impressive the collaboration between the groundwater monitoring and the maintenance of the data set by Otago Regional Council. We are, I believe, providing world-leading science here in Dunedin, and I will hold this up as a flag that says that. It's the first time I know of in any futures study that is providing a holistic overview of lots of different hazards. It's not just focusing on one. And we are dealing with both the short-term events and tides and rainfall and storm surges, as well as the permanent and long-term effects. So it's dealing with the whole lot, which is not normally seen. It has precision, it's at site-specific property level. It's not a generic, just a general whitewash. It's right there with property level information. And it tells us that the ground is a lot less permeable than we thought. We're a lot less prone than we feared. Firstly, from the initial monitoring network had one of the boreholes, which is very tidal. And the worry was if that continued everywhere, it would be a problem. But also there's less flow of water through from the hills out into the coastal plain. And now it's ready for uptake in the South Dunedin Futures program. So the report's published by GNS Science. It's on our website. You can get it through the web shop in return for leaving your name there, or so that we can count how many people are using it. And really it's there's data sets that go with it as well that are on the internet, about 1 gigabyte of GIS data telling you the height of the water table, how much it varies and so forth. It's dealing with this kind of trifecta of groundwater rising in response to sea level rise, the change in the rainfall runoff that you get as a result of that, and therefore the change to pluvial flooding, and then coastal inundation and the chances of the sea coming in over the land as well. So it's got all of those aspects to it. And I'll just highlight here a couple of the chapters, which firstly, we're using the present day observations, and we're using what they call nowcasting, but we're taking those observations, we're looking at what causes those changes now, and then we're taking that and projecting into the future to give a forecast of what it might look like. So it's founded on the current knowledge and it's subject to current situations. So if mitigation goes in there, if you change the stormwater network in a big way, if you do a major development or pumping or something, it won't be accounted for, of course, in the forecast.
Apologies.
The groundwater network is 35 sites, and from that, we're able to look at where the effective tides reach is in, and that's all kind of written up in the report. But then we're saying, okay, what happens when we have a storm surge on sea level rise? What's that going to do? And the effect of the tides decays inland away from the coast and away from the harbour. It decays away exponentially such that the amount of water is about 10% by the time amount of seawater is about 10% of the groundwater once you're in about 800 metres from the shore. And the tidal effects decay away so that only in the most permeable ground do you really see much more than the 10 centimetre tide, and mostly they're only at the millimetre. Groundwater is shallow. It's generally less than 2 metres. And so we've got all of these surfaces that map out that depth to saturation, which we call the water table. And you can see it here with the colours representing the areas that are shallowest in blues and greens. We also have surfaces mapped of the median level for that 4-year period, the minimum and the maximum, the high tide level, and storm surge conditions, a whole range of different GIS surfaces. And then we adjust that for sea level rise for future changes. Just to kind of put that in a slightly simpler kind of graphic, if you like. If you look here at the water table is essentially the top of the saturated level in the ground. And as that goes up, the amount of unsaturated ground decreases, which means the amount of room for the ground to store water like a sponge decreases. Okay, so the changing storage potential goes down as the groundwater comes up. And the problem that we have is that sea level rise will make the groundwater rise up because it has to be equilibrated with it ultimately because the groundwater is flowing away with gravity. But it always varies with tides and storms and other things. So sometimes it's above that. But as it goes down, as the storage potential goes down, we lose the ability to store that rainfall, and therefore you have much more runoff from the land. We also, as it goes up, we develop springs and ponding at the surface. So I've shown that on the right-hand side of that diagram. So that's the sort of situation. And ultimately, the water table will rise with sea level rise and decrease the capacity to store rainfall. And it may come out of the ground eventually, and it may pond at the surface eventually. But it's going to start by doing it periodically in high tides or in storm surges. It's not necessarily a hazard. And this is a really important point to get across. Just because you have a little bit of seepage in a spring does not make it a hazard. It may be a nuisance, it may be a problem, but there's a whole range of different groundwater levels at which problems start to occur or issues start to occur that you need to think about. And I've shown you some of them there. For example, liquefaction vulnerability really increases substantially once groundwater gets below 2 metres. And as it gets shallower and shallower, the chance of liquefaction during an earthquake goes up. So the liquefaction vulnerability will increase with time. But that happens deep down. And it's not going to affect the roads or anything until it gets to perhaps 0.5 metre or 1 metre below surface when you start to weaken the ground or affect foundations for buildings. So there's a whole range of a spectrum of problems that can occur at different levels. And that's why it's very hard to map groundwater as a hazard, because it's different for different people, let alone coming out of the ground where it may flow away, it may just make the ground wet. But in some places it can pond and even go up and potentially wet houses. So it's difficult to get that across, that it's quite a tricky problem. So we've given you a forecast of the future and how that's going to look with sea level rise. And this is a rough table of that going across from left to right in 10 centimetre increments of sea level rise. So each one goes from 0, 10, 20 and so forth across to the right hand side. And the 3 rows represent the loss of capacity of the ground to store water, i.e. you then become reliant 100% on the stormwater network to take away water. And that's fine, as long as you design accordingly. Next row down is emergent groundwater when you're getting ponding, and it'll be eventually poking out as springs and causing nuisance wetness, and then eventually potentially ponding locally. But it may well run off into the stormwater network anyway. And then under that is coastal inundation, and the sea coming in over the land, and in this case over Portsmouth Drive, at about 60 to 70 centimetres of sea level rise. So just to bring that home a bit more, let's go back to this groundwater response to rain. And here we are. This is a graph that shows for every millimetre of rain how much the groundwater goes up. And it goes up, it's like having whiskey in your glass. The more, ice in your glass of whiskey, the more ice you have, the further your whiskey is going to go up in the glass because there's less space for it. It's exactly the same problem. So those areas you see in red are the ones with less pore space, and they're the muddier sediments. But there's also laying on top of that the effect of having natural surfaces. So Forbury Park, for example, sits there as a red spot because it's not only got green space, but it's also got muddier sediment. So it's a combination of stormwater and surface stuff as well as what's in the ground. And when you put that together, you can look at what is the return. If you take a 12-hour return period for rainfall, at what point do you lose or have no storage on a 2-year annual return interval or a 10-year annual return interval, 100-year? So coloured here is saying where is there essentially 100% reliance on the stormwater network given the rainfall infiltration is no longer able to get into the ground. And that's at 0 centimetres of sea level rise, but if you put 40 centimetres of sea level rise, it does this. So all that's showing you then is that the rise of groundwater is affecting that engineering that we currently enjoy, and that we'll have to be thinking about it accordingly. We provided the report in terms of increments of sea level rise in 10 centimetre amounts because we don't know when that's going to happen. It could be a long way out if we reduce our emissions, but if we have the worst case scenario in the SSP 8.5, then it could be, for example, at 40 centimetres of sea level rise, could be as early as 2077. So it's difficult. So we give it as the physical part without uncertainty so that then that can go into any planning and accordingly. And as we start to get a handle on what our emissions are, it'll keep the planning up to date essentially. So here's the picture that's really important. If you take those graphs and that thing that I showed you, as you go from right to left with sea level rise here, you can see the percentage of land that's exposed to a problem or an issue. It's not necessarily a hazard. It's a problem or an issue that will be needed to be addressed. And the first thing that you see is that band of browny red, which is saying that the contribution to pluvial flooding is going to increase substantially because the ground's not going to be able to store that rainfall. And then eventually we'll have some effects of the flooding from below, essentially, the groundwater coming out in the blue, in the dark blue. And then sea coming in over the land, coastal inundation is a step type function. It happens very quickly at about 60 to 70 centimetres of sea level rise at the moment across Portsmouth Drive because of the height of that land, which was, of course, reclaimed within my lifetime and could easily be built up again if the will was there to do so. So the tricky thing about this is I'm giving it to you there in sea level rise increments, but each of those different things that are potentially going to happen could happen in windows of 40 to 50 years. And I've got some timeframes sort of shown here where it could be stepping in for the first 30 to 40 years. We've got to worry about that rainfall related issue. And then we need to be thinking about emergent groundwater, and then we need to be thinking about coastal inundation. The trick is to make sure that we know those multi-hazards and when they're coming. We need to know the rough timeframes so we don't get too caught up in one investment part or one mitigation or one adaptation method if the other one is going to take over later on. So all we have to do is make sure that we plan accordingly, and I'm exceedingly proud of this work because this is the first time that anyone's been able to do that. So from here, it goes into the South Dunedin Futures program. It's informing what is happening. And from here, the engineers and the South Dunedin Futures program will be looking at what's at risk, what matters the most, and into that consultation phase with the community. They will then look at what are the options, where do we sit on the cost spectrum for doing whatever we need to do in order to solve these issues. But this, as far as I'm concerned, is as advanced as you get in New Zealand at the moment in terms of really understanding the nub of the problem. And the science, I think, is well formed. It's got data there that's telling you exactly what's going on. And it's a real tribute to Regional Council to have invested in collecting and maintaining that data set. And I thank you for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon, for that admirably clear account of the complexities of time and space and all sorts of other changes occurring. That was very good. Is there anyone else up in our presenting panel who would like to add anything at this stage, or we'll see, otherwise we'll see if our councillors have any questions about this. Looks as though we will go to questions if anyone has any. Andrew and then Elliot. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. It seems, Simon, the data since 2019 or thereabouts has provided maybe lots of pieces of the puzzle about the dynamic water interaction, whether it's rainwater, groundwater, or tidal activity. Are there many other pieces of the puzzle to identify to provide greater certainty than what you've been able to present to us today?
I think if you look deeply into the report, there's two aspects I'd like to highlight. Is one is this: any scientist will have a whole series of assumptions and caveats. And then if it's good science, it will have raised more questions than it went in with to answer. And it does raise some questions. So the key things I'd like to highlight is first the assumptions. And one of the key ones is that it's totally predicated on protection from the sand dunes. That if we get a tsunami and then a storm surge event and erosion cutting through those dunes and the sea breaks through the dunes as it once did in the past before they made John Wilson Drive and things, or it did more than once, then all bets are off. Okay, so look after the dunes. There are other assumptions around the behaviours of and the amount of rain where I don't know exactly what's happening in the stormwater network and what its influence is, and I need to look at that more carefully. We've got data being collected, but I haven't examined it. But the key thing is that if the stormwater network starts to get drowned, then it might become a non-linear thing where it produces greater rise. It may be, as we found in Christchurch after the earthquakes, that the stormwater network is holding down the groundwater in some areas. And we've tried to find that, but we don't know for sure. And so that's an area where I'd like to do more work, and it needs to eventually be done. And I guess then the question is, what else do we need to learn about and things? And I think there is a need for understanding the flood modelling of that whole area in terms of the stormwater runoff, the ponding. Now that we've got new LiDAR data, a better understanding of just what was happening during those floods, and that's an area which I may or may not be able to get funding to work on, but I'd certainly be interested to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Weir.
Thanks. I was just wondering, because you were talking about how sort of groundbreaking this study is, excuse the pun. And I'm just wondering if that is, in your opinion, mostly because of the technological inability to do something like this before a decade ago or so, or whether it's more political will in terms of funding not going into looking at this kind of thing in previous decades or whatever.
So the issue with groundwater here is shallow groundwater. And if you went to Christchurch, there's shallow groundwater that sits on top of the aquitard, and then we have the aquifers down below. And Christchurch has got a really good network because in the earthquake, the damage caused by it required EQC to install 265 odd, or they did 980 CPT holes or something like that, 20,000 CPT holes, 980 of them they were measuring groundwater in, and now they do 265 of them measuring every 15 minutes. And our network's as good as that, it's just there over a much wider area. Ours is as dense. But you must monitor the shallow groundwater that's unconfined, that moves up and down with air pressure and is connected to the sea. The stuff in the aquifers is irrelevant. And mostly in New Zealand, we measure stuff in aquifers for groundwater quality as a resource and for extraction purposes. We don't use the groundwater in South Dunedin. And so it's unique in that way, in that there's only 2 or 3 centres in New Zealand that have got good shallow groundwater monitoring. And similarly overseas, most people are focused on groundwater as a resource rather than groundwater as a hazard. And now some places are starting to catch up with that, but not many of them are doing kind of 15-minute monitoring of temperature, pressure, and all those, and conductivity, and all those parameters. Yeah, there'll be some studies, but then they're not taking them and informing the hazard in terms of, they tend to be thinking about it in terms of the chronic condition at the end, rather than the transition that takes us into there, through which people have to live through and respond to and get insurance for, or work with banks, or buy houses, or make decisions, which is a completely different thing from saying X many years down the way you're going to have groundwater at the surface. It's like, well, hold on, we've got 50 years worth of living to get there. So that's where I think it's quite unique.
Thank you. Any further questions about anything? Yeah, Councillor Murphy.
It's just interesting that this groundwater is available, perhaps as an asset as opposed to a hazard. Is it freshwater groundwater that we've got, and predominantly under South Dunedin? I'm just thinking if it was a drinking supply, is it?
Yeah.
How far can you take it?
So the Dunedin flat is actually very thin. It's just a thin veneer of very muddy sediment, and you would actually call it an aquitard in most other places. Christchurch, the sea level rose and progressed across the land and left behind some mud during the Holocene, and regressed, which is why you get this muddy sediment that liquefied in Christchurch. but underneath it is the open gravels that carry all the good water. South Dunedin water would never be a resource for drinking because it's unconfined, which means that you're always getting flush of water down from the surface. It's not protected by having an aquitard over it. And there's nothing much down below. At Harbourside, there's some layers which do have some slightly higher pressure, but not such that when you drill down, it doesn't flow right out, which we would call artesian. So we've got this water there, but it's really sluggish. The temperature of the water lags behind the temperature of the air by about 4 months. And it's every time it rains, if you get a cold rain on it, we don't get that coldness carried through, or the loss of heat, or vice versa. It's really sluggish. And the other day we got some results, and they're not official by any means, but they were looking like the ages at the bottom of one of the boreholes was 150 years for that water. Don't quote me on that. It's still being assessed. We don't know quite why we got such an old age, but that's saying that it could be 4 or 5 times older than most water in aquifers in New Zealand. So it's very sluggish. And we found that we had 5 lines of evidence when we wrote the first version of this report in 2020, which said, we don't think it's nearly as much of a problem as we originally were concerned. There's not the tidal effects, there's not the temperature anomaly, there's mainly fresh water, although it's a little bit conductive because it's been sitting in the sediment for a long time and dissolved salts and that sort of thing. And then there are a couple of other lines I can't think of off the top of my head, but yeah, it's not. They call it an aquifer. It's been referred to as the South Dunedin aquifer. I would call it the South Dunedin aquitard.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, I had one small detailed question. In the map on page 8, it shows a perched aquifer under the sand dunes. What on earth is a perched aquifer, and what is its significance?
Yeah. So the sand dunes are really interesting. If the sand is more permeable than the muddy estuarine muck that's underneath, and it rains sufficiently enough and with moisture that blows in off the sea, that it's percolating down through that sand, and there's a lens of fresh water that sits above the muddy layer underneath. It's sitting on that muddy layer, but it's fresh water that's not exchanging. And then underneath it, there's older water, which is a bit more conductive. And so that perched aquifer is a lens of relatively fresh water. It's probably permeable enough to extract some water from if you needed to, fill the pond at the Model Engineering Society, which the guy's continually asking me if they can do that. But it's in relatively good condition, and as far as I'm aware, I haven't seen anything in the reports for example, from the landfill that suggests that that's been contaminated. We've certainly got fresh results from it and things like that. But there is quite a bit of fresh water in that sand dune.
All right, thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Kelly.
Yep, thank you. This is fascinating. What more needs to be done now? From an ongoing, is this fait accompli as to allowing decision making from an ORC DCC perspective? Should more monitoring, where are the information gaps that remain? And for a future to be established for this area, what more do you recommend needs done?
Our ambition has always been to understand the effect of building a city on top of a natural system. We've studied the natural system and the natural fluctuations as best we can, but clearly there's a whole built infrastructure that affects it. What we need to do is to go back to looking at the relationships between the two, and to the extent to which, for example, groundwater rise affects rainfall runoff in the second storm. Rain will make groundwater rise. The next rainfall and the runoff will be affected by whether that's had time to go down. So it's the relationships between the built system and the natural system that to me still have many questions. And that's really the thing we wanted to see happen, is to have a lot more monitoring of places where we understand both the wastewater network, the stormwater network, and the ground around it in the groundwater, and whereabouts the water is going in and coming out, and where it might be leaking or not. If it is leaking, we don't know, and what the vulnerability of the system is. So that's an area where I think that focus should be. There's also questions, okay, we've done, the South Dunedin, but there's an awful lot of the city which has sewage that goes through septic tanks. And a lot of those are shallow and will have groundwater that will also be rising. So communities like Long Beach or, some of those other low-lying places it wouldn't hurt to put some installation of equipment in there. It's not hard to drill a hole. It's, you can do it by hand, and you can put a pipe in the ground with some slots in it and a sock around it, and that works. But to do it to 6 meters might take a drill rig, but not a major one.
Thank you. I was going to ask you about next steps, and you've just talked about some of those. That's just very good. And of course, overall, this is informing the planning about what's happening in South Dunedin and what's going to.
Yeah, and can I just make one other point, is that to date, we brought national science money to the city to work on this via the New Zealand Sea Rise program, via GNS's Strategic Science Investment Fund, via a Marsden fund that we've got working with Otago University. And we brought that, and then co-funding from Otago Regional Council has enabled us to bring in that investment through their investing in the network, but also through co-funding some of this delivery that we're giving you now today. That relationship is really important, but it's also tenuous because the Dunedin case study has been funded already, and other centres will be saying, hey, it's our turn. We have to come up with the reasons scientifically to justify continuing the science investment. Otherwise, it becomes a local issue to be dealt with. So I need to find new ways, and that's where I asked for the support from the local communities to support that in my endeavours to bring that money to Dunedin.
Thank you. That is worth our being aware of. So thanks for describing that. Councillor Weir.
Thanks. Yeah, you did raise a really good point around that sort of tension between the local importance of the scientific work and also the national and international importance of this kind of work and the implications it'll likely have for other areas, not just in Dunedin, but across the country and stuff, and how the science will be utilised. But obviously it is also a lot of people in the South Dunedin community are going to be wondering how this is going to, impact them and stuff, and how it's going to translate into implications for the South Dunedin future program. My question is just how are we going to communicate this in a really accessible way to the public through the program?
Yeah, it's an unapologetically long and difficult science report, which these guys are trying to deal with. 103 pages of quite detailed stuff, and we will be working through various ways to try and get that information out there. I like to think that if I was a property owner in South Dunedin, I would like the best possible science on my property. If I'm scared, I want that done. I don't want a broad brush from central government that just sort of says, oh, all of South Dunedin is doomed. I want to know that the best possible science is being done on my property. In the meantime, clearly the messages and what we've learned from here can transfer elsewhere. And GNS Science is there as a national provider of science, but it's an international provider of science. And we'd like to think that Dunedin will be a case study which will not give people fear, but will give them confidence that they've got the best stuff going on. So it's a delicate balance between keeping the confidence, understanding the problems, and making it clear that you have turned on the light and that you're not walking around in the dark.
Sorry. I totally agree. I was just wondering if we have any specific plans for how we will communicate. You know, are we planning some more public forums or newsletters and stuff to bring those shots out? Yeah, all for the team.
Yes, through Mr. Chair. Yeah, yes, we have a communication plan, and that's referred into the report from paragraph 40. So really the purpose is to make sure this information is understood and shared with the South Dunedin future team, but also the public. And one step toward that is to share this information on the Otago Natural Hazard database. So it's not all the data, because that's a lot of information. We'll be sharing the most telling information, but people can always access the full report through the GNS website. But that's one step to make sure this information is available to the public.
Thanks. And as a council, we receive regular reports from the South Dunedin Future Programme, and we expect we will continue to do that. Councillor Meham.
Yeah, just in regards to the 35 sites that we've got around South Dunedin for monitoring, are we continuing to monitor now that they're established, or is this something that you're saying needs ongoing funding to maintain the monitoring of those sites? So, you know, have we stopped using them, or are we going to keep using them?
Yeah, for the moment, we're keeping using them. So we still go and maintain them, download the data every 3 months. Because of the need that Dr. Cox has explained around, more information will be useful for improving our understanding.
Can I add something there? So when we set the network up, we got collaboration with a lot of money. And those sites, we even occupied some sites that were put in by a student, Emma Fordyce, who did a brilliant job back in about 2012, 2013 for a master's. So we used her sites as well. We may not continue monitoring them all at 15-minute intervals, but we need to set ourselves some goals, because it's expensive to collect the data and look after it. It's once you've got it in, it's potentially it's staff time to download. And one of the great things that's happened with ORC staff is they have been absolutely pedantic. Mark Etmer, I would like a big shout out to for running that network, and his level of perfectionism in dipping them regularly, checking them, calibrating them. It's not simple. So incredible experience that's gone into that. But you have to get to a point where you say, well, let's monitor for this long, and let's try and get this many storms and this many rains and this many different events that you are looking for. And eventually you tick those off and you go, right, now why are we here? The main thing at the moment is to keep it going while we've got the stormwater and wastewater network being monitored, so we can see the interrelationships between the two. But in time, you would have to rationalise it right back and say, actually, let's just do 10% of the sites, the key ones. But that we haven't got to that point yet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Look, we have one recommendation here, which is that we receive the report, the GNS report. Gary, you saying you're happy to move that? Someone able to second that? Lloyd, thank you. Is there any discussion or debate? Will? Kate.
So receiving the report is one thing. I think it's been very clear that we need to make sure the knowledge gets out and shared, and that isn't addressed in the motion, albeit, and it should be. I think this has been funded by ratepayers and by taxpayers of New Zealand, and I know it has in part been sent out there and there's been some PR about it, but I think it's beholden upon all of us to ensure that we're part of those discussions and sharing it. So I just want to, it's not just coming in, but it is going out as often as we can. Thank you for the work.
Yeah, thanks. And as in really all of these papers, yes, we're receiving information, but that idea about communication with our communities is inherent in all of them too. Kevin.
Yeah, that's actually, in my understanding, that's all covered, and by receiving that in our communications considerations on 40, 41 and 42 is saying here that it's going to happen. So I'm very comfortable with that.
Any further discussion? No? We're ready to move that. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? All passed. Thank you very much. And look, thank you again. We recognise that a report like that doesn't just turn up by magic. It turns up by a great deal of work and a great deal of expertise by many people. So thank you to you and everyone who has been involved in that very work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.
We are moving on next to paper 8.2, the Clutha Delta Natural Hazards Adaptation. And just looking at the time, I'm thinking after this paper, we may have a break for lunch, but we will deal with this first. And this paper too, we've got lots of information in here, and the paper also has information about the engagement planning and how that's going to be managed. So it looks as though, welcome to Jamie and Anne who have joined us, and we're handing over to you up front now.
Thank you. I'm just going to say a few words about the report. It's a regular update, so we presented at the last committee, and that's just another update to the committee about the work. But the focus of this report, and one of the main points, is about engagement, and I'll ask Jamie to explain what we're doing on that front. The report is updating on other things, but I think the engagement part is quite key for the moment for us.
Cool. So I'll just give a brief overview of the community engagement planning section. So just to firstly really emphasise why engagement matters. So community engagement is really key for successful natural hazards and climate adaptation and achieving sustainable outcomes, improving community wellbeing and ultimately improving community resilience. This report is kind of informed by academic research, best practice, practitioner-led guidance, international national policy, which all says that meaningful community engagement leads to better decision making. And also, I'll just note that ORC has committed to community engagement through He Mahi Rōrika, our significance engagement and Māori participation policy, and also through our strategic direction. And so this report is kind of piloting a new engagement framework or a kete, a toolkit of engagement templates and things that are currently in development by ORC staff. And these are informed by best practice that I just mentioned before. So it's taking a phased approach to our community engagement, and this report focuses on the first phase. So if you turn to page 22, figure 2 there outlines the phased approach, and this report focuses on phase 1, which is the plan and prepare stage, really about setting the scene, gathering that background information and kind of setting a really strong foundation for which we can build our engagement upon. So it's that early pre-planning engagement phase. It runs through kind of the context because every place and community is different, setting the scope, what's on the table for engagement, identifying our audience who might be interested or impacted by this work, kind of what existing relationships or networks are already out there, thinking about the engagement purpose, why are we engaging, what are we trying to achieve, who's leading this engagement, and then ultimately getting to the level of engagement. And what this report recommends collaborate is the level of engagement given how complex and how significant this project might be for affected community members. And just to reiterate that through our significance engagement and Māori participation policy, we have committed to using that IAP spectrum, which is figure 4, which is where that level of engagement sits on that spectrum. And then it talks about the next steps, which is that second phase of engagement, which is that design, which is the design phase, and that will hopefully, but that's what we're doing next, is mapping out the kind of stages of the engagement. What are some of the key objectives, risk management, what methods should we use to engage with different communities, and how might we evaluate our engagement. And it's also when we as a team need to begin to start having some conversations with our partners, with affected community members, with key stakeholders, to begin that dialogue, begin building those relationships, strengthening existing relationships, and so that we can make sure that any community engagement planning going forward is with and for our communities and it makes sense for the Clutha Delta area. So that's kind of an overview of what this paper is trying to lay out there as the foundation for that first phase.
Thank you very much. Perhaps, and look, I guess we'll be talking here about the engagement and then a further further detail about the coastal erosion situation at the Clutha mouth. First of all, perhaps we'll see if there is any questions from councillors about the engagement section of this. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, and I think I get this. I'm just trying to compare it to the previous paper where there's been quite a lot of public consultation already in South Dunedin, where governors have been invited to that stuff, and we have already started some with with the Clutha District on this, but I don't know that there's been a governance at all, and if that's going to be part of the process and why it's different. If it is going to be different, I don't know. Maybe I'll pick that up wrong, but yeah.
Share the mic.
It really is a timing issue. At this stage, we've just met and briefed the Chief Executive and Senior Management at Clutha District in terms of the approach we intend taking. So this project is not as far advanced as South Dunedin, which is why at this point in time there's been no involvement of councillors in any community meetings because we have not yet had those.
That's absolutely fine. Sorry, when I see Clutha District Council, I had assumed it was as on paragraph 10, and that's, sorry, staff, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions at this stage? Okay, we'll move.
Sorry, just so the engagement process is that something we're going to try and use this process through most of our engagement processes with ORC?
So yeah, I can't. At the moment, we're piloting kind of an engagement framework or a toolkit of templates and things that then once kind of worked through that stuff, yeah, will kind of be like a template for how we might approach engagement and other programs across the organisation. That's the idea. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I guess we're seeing this, first of all, we've seen this through the South Dunedin Future Programme, and this sort of model has been used for the He Te Whare Whakatipu as well. And so I guess we are getting more practiced at it and finding that it's been very successful in many ways. Okay, now am I handing over to Anne now, or who would like to talk to us further? Or Jean-Luc? Yep, you go.
It might be just best to take questions if there's any questions on any other aspects of the paper.
Right. Yeah. I thought it might be useful to have a bit of an update on the coastal erosion situation down at the river mouth.
No, we don't seem to have the staff here that can speak to that in detail, but if there's any questions, we have to answer them in relation to what we've written in our report.
Right, thanks. Councillor Robertson.
Looks as though, just looking at that table at about paragraph 85, that by the end of 2024, all new natural hazards investigations are complete. So we'll have is it true that thank you, Andrew. Is it true that by the end of this year, we'll have a really comprehensive understanding of where we're at with all of the technical data on hazards? It probably answers Ellen's, Councillor Somerville's question. Sorry. There's a table.
Page 38.
Yeah. The timeline for the program seems to suggest that the technical work around hazards would be done by the end of this year.
Yeah, that's
the goal.
Yeah, that's the goal of doing that. Now, study may discover things that we need to investigate further, but we think the bulk of the study, so the flood hazard investigation and liquefaction investigation and coastal will be completed by the end of this calendar year.
Thank you.
I think perhaps what's helpful is what's set out under section 23 on page 20, where there's that table 1 shows the key areas of natural hazard focus. So those natural hazards adaptation work program. So those key areas there too. And also I note what's in paragraph 16, which is saying we're really sort of, well, I'll read it out. The first iteration of a natural hazards adaptation strategy for the Clutha Delta proposed to be completed by December 2025 in order to be able to inform the next LTP planning cycle. So I think that's really useful to say this, you know, we're not going to have this ready tomorrow, but we're looking to the future in that next LTP cycle. Questions from any other councillors? I do not see any at this stage. Well, let's just check what those recommendations are.
Happy to move all three.
All right. So the recommendations are that we note the report, note the adaptation work program and community engagement program planning, and note the coastal erosion situation at Clutha River mouth. Now, Councillor Malcolm has moved those. We have a seconder. Councillor Kelleher, any discussion? Councillor Robertson.
Not on this time, sorry. I just wanted to say thank you for bringing this to us in a comprehensive package. We have a lot of experience in technical aspects of hazards analysis that we can draw on, ensuring that we do have all the technical elements together in a holistic manner. So it's really good to be able to see that in a transparent way, all those strands coming together. As we heard in the previous paper, whenever there's an element of risk, it brings communities so much more rigor, but also sense of security when they have good technical data that they can draw on. But not only that, they're being supported through the collaborative manner as well. And we've really built up our team in that area as well. And it's just, really fantastic to see all of those strands coming together in the timeline for that. So, yeah, right behind it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Knuckle.
Please, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to thank you all very much for, and particularly Jamie, for making it really clear around the consultation. And I think it was a really good presentation and answered all their questions for us, which was really awesome. And you know, we got the next steps set out, so we all know, you know, where we are in the pathway. So thank you very much.
Any further speakers? No? We're ready to put those three motions, to get those three recommendations all at once. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? No. Pass. Carried. Look, thank you very much again. Now, it looks as though it is in fact lunchtime. Can I make that decision? Or do I need to move and second? Move for an adjournment. Well, I move the adjourn for half an hour. Come back.
That's a dictatorship.
Someone please second that. Thank you. All those in favour? Right, so if you're watching intently online or live streaming, please come back at 12:30. We'll see you all then. Thank you very much.
What a lie that he wants a hot chocolate as all his work. We'll get him one. And something else brown and possibly in the bottle.
Well, welcome back. We will resume the Safety and Resilience Committee meeting. We hope you've all had a good lunch. We have. Thank you. So look, we're up to paper 8.3, Head of Lake Whakateru Natural Hazards Adaptation. A crowd gathering, and I know we are going to be talking about the update on the socio-economic assessment and a further update on the community engagement there. So look, very happy to hand over to Jean-Luc and Devon for this case. Read those microphones. Thank you, Jean-Luc.
Thank you. So again, this report is an update to the committee following the last update in November. It's when we look to figure one, it's really giving you an update on the different pieces of work that are summarized in that figure. And one project I'd like to focus on today is the socioeconomic impact assessment that is progressing, and Anne is going to give you an update on that in more detail, and also on the revised engagement schedule that will have effect on actually the date to complete the strategy. So I'll leave Anne to explain that.
Thank you, everybody. So as John said, we're progressing well. We've got the 3 tactical studies that are currently underway. That's the socio-economic impact assessment, the first phase of that, the natural hazard risk assessment, and the flood protection and nature-based solutions feasibility assessment. So that's 3 technical reports. So that supports, our underlying foundation of information for decision making. So the timing of when those reports are being delivered and the feedback we've received from the community around the sequence of when they want to receive information has basically led to us to adjusting the schedule. So the community has indicated that they would like to receive the results of the socio-economic impact assessment and the risk assessment before they do other engagement activities, such as talking about pathways and things like that. So in response to that, we've adjusted the overall schedule for the engagement plan. And that's, if you look to the last page, page 54, there's a table 2. So that's the new high-level timeline for the program and engagement activities and the development of the adaptation strategy. So if we sort of work through that, basically we're progressing the technical assessments and the strategy development design this quarter. And then next quarter, we get delivery of the technical studies that are listed there. And then, so accompanying that, we would then go out and present that information to councillors and the community through our engagement activities. So we would give technical study updates and a discussion of adaptation pathways in quarter 2 of this year. And then following that we would deliver a draft strategy and action plans. So the first draft, so people can comment on it. So we would enter the review cycle, and that would be in quarter 3. And we would take that to councillors and the community and get feedback on the draft. And then, that would then our first iteration of the strategy would be finalised in Q4 of 2024. So that's basically the new timeline. And it's, in response to community feedback. So is there any questions around the timeline initially?
Right, we'll go to Councillor Malcolm and then Councillor Wilson.
Just with the community, I thought you said that you pushed it out a wee bit because they wanted the socio-economic assessment, and the other one they wanted was
the risk assessment.
The risk assessment.
Natural hazard risk assessment.
Yeah. So you're giving that to them at the start of this quarter, or as soon as that's ready?
As soon as that's ready, and in Q2. Yeah.
Then how much are we giving them enough time to absorb that before we then go back to them with the interventions and options?
So it will be tight for that engagement period. So if the community indicates that that it's too much information in a short period of time, then we can consider
adjusting that in response to that. But yeah, so the current critical path is the delivery of the risk assessment. So that's not available until early April, computed and peer reviewed. So
Right. So you've got the flexibility within there to, the community's got this information. We've got time to slip it a bit to ensure that we're not putting too much pressure on them to. Which you've already done.
It is certainly a risk that we're going to have to keep in mind as we work through the program.
Thank you. Good talk.
Kia ora. Thank you. I get table 1 and the process in there. And I'm just going to check again with continuity with other projects that we're taking a similar approach, or if we're not, why? And so when and at what point we have probably pass this over for more of the QLDC involvement as lead or partner for this project. So if you look at table 1, you're doing the 2 first yellow ones is what we're waiting for first. And we want to do those first before we do the other work, but we're going to try and push those through. At the end of this quarter in our long-term plan, to make it happen, we've got an adaptation strategy development, is that correct? Where we want to end up on this table?
So the adaptation strategy development, so that'll be, the first draft will be available in Q3.
Yeah. And adopted. At what point do we say that this is more locally driven, rated, and this is a high level understanding who pays for what at that level? We start doing actions. Are we thinking that this will be a natural hazard regionally rated, or do we hand this over to QLDC to implement at that stage? Because that's in sort of my head we've done our bit getting to the end of box 3. What can we do? And then it's almost a QLDC issue of what are you anticipating that ORC will lead this right through?
So I think through till delivery of the first iteration of the plan, yes. Some of the responsibilities will continue to be ORC's responsibility. So if you think about ORC has a position for flood forecasting, for example, flood monitoring, they've got river management activities, and depending on the results of the feasibility study, they might be proposed to, work towards a business case for, river management, for example, could be something that, comes out of that process. There's still that decision-making process to be worked through. We're not quite at that stage yet. We're still at the feasibility level. So QLDC also has obviously responsibilities for certain of the infrastructure in the area, and they are tied into the process. So we just had an update with QLDC last week at a staff level. So they will be carrying forward, to their ELT as well, to talk through how they want to be involved in how they want to be tied in through the rest of the year.
Yeah. And perhaps it's a question for us collectively, but I'm just wondering, do you anticipate that whatever work program we do, that this continues to be rated what I think is general rates? Or would you see at some stage when we start getting to actions that it becomes targeted rates for those specific beneficiaries?
It's not a question.
It's not a question for us, it is a question for us as well.
Yes, it's part of your broader consideration about how you fund anything, including this. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for the questions. Thank you for the answers. Are there any further questions around this paper? I do not see any. Well, the recommendations for this paper, let's have a look. 2. One is that we note the report, and the second is that we note the head of Lake Whakatipu Natural Hazards Adaptation Work Program and community engagement.
Just presuming, I think we're varying what was a previous motion, in which case we should note that it's a variation on that. Is that correct? Have I picked that up correctly?
In terms of the timing?
Yes.
The timeline, yes,
Yes.
the timing is later about the delivery of the adaptation strategy.
Just to make it make more sense of this, because I think it's a different time frame, and I was just wondering whether that second part should note the changes to that.
We could perhaps add a bit as noted in the and note the revised timetable.
Thank you, yeah.
Yep, okay, so that sounds right to add that. Is there any, well, let's see, are we ready to move those? And is anyone prepared to do that? Kate, you're prepared to move those two recommendations? Kevin, you'd second those. Is there any discussion? And that second one with that slight amendment is the addition to say, and noting the amended timetable. Kevin.
Yeah, look, I think Councillor Wilson brings up a look, very good paper, and really good to see that you're having flexibility with the communities around how you're engaging in the pressures that you're putting upon them. So that's really good, and understanding you've got a huge workload anyway. So balancing those two is pretty critical. But it does lead to an important discussion we as governance do, and as an organisation need to understand where our boundaries end and start, where our roles and responsibilities end and start, and when we do hand it back to a local, either a TA or a local community to do those. So I think we need to, at some stage have that high level discussion to make sure we are getting something succinct and clear as we progress through this natural hazard space. But happy with what's happening.
Thank you. Any further discussion? No, we're ready to put those two recommendations then. Right, all those in favour?
Aye.
Against? So that is carried. Thank you very much. And again, thank you for the ongoing work around all that. So look, we'll move on to 8.4, the lower Tylee risk assessment. It may mean a slight change over of personnel. Now, there's a great deal of information in this paper, and yes, we're talking community engagement as well as hazards information and risk information. And I note that there has already been a press release about this, and there is noted in there engagement with the other local stakeholders. I'll just let you all get settled. Welcome, everybody. So now I'm not, we know we have seen most of you up here before. I'm not sure if we have seen all of you before a council committee meeting. Do you think we have? So is it, sorry, Elise, is it?
Elise, yes.
Right, look, welcome. Elise, is this your first time at one of our committee meetings?
No.
Oh, you've been here, probably I've missed it. Right.
Oh, it's probably a while ago. It's been a few years.
Right, well, good to have you all here, as well as Michelle and Brett joining us. So now I understand we have a PowerPoint presentation to go with this, which is diligent in the resource centre under Safety and Resilience Committee resources, but it's up here on here, and I believe Michelle is going to take us through that, and that can be our introduction, and then we can have further discussion and further questions. Over to you. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having us here to talk about this paper. I do want to introduce the staff here, and there are also people online. Mr. Brett Patterson sitting beside me is our program management. Mr. Brett Patterson sitting beside me is our program management team leader. And then Elise has introduced herself, and we have Dr. Jean-Luc Payon. We also have Tonkin and Taylor staff online. If you're available to introduce yourselves as well, please. Okay, thanks very much. We'll be doing a joint presentation across staff for the PowerPoint, and we'll be kicking off with Brett first. Sorry, Jean-Luc.
I know, sorry. Okay.
Sorry.
Yep. So yes, this is the lower Tylee risk assessment report prepared by Tonkin and Taylor. So a little bit of background, starting with kind of the environment that obviously the Tylee floodplain sits within. So the two drawings on the screen at the moment, the one on the left is indicating the floodplain, and the areas in blue are the areas that sit below sea level. To the right, that is flood mapping from 1923, indicating the extent of the flooding that can occur over the Taieri within that form of event. So these two graphs provide some context to the levels that we see on the Taieri. So the graph on the left is our whole of record for the river level in Taieri, indicating the 1980 flood and 2017 floods. The graph on the right, is the cross section of the Taieri at Outram, indicating where the berm levels coincide with the flood banks and the flood levels for those events. This is important in context of the report because we, through the risk assessment, we've tested the network or the scheme to 3,000 cubics, which is over what we have on record. So 1980 flood was around 2,600 cubics. We've tested the scheme above that to determine the risk rates.
Jean-Luc, did you want to comment on any of this?
Just quick comment to highlight the graph on the left-hand side with the blue line. That's the water level recorded at Outram since recording started around the 1960s. And the orange band we have is showing every time we get to that channel of the Taieri being full. And the channel of the Taieri is not the full extent of a flood, it's just what is shown on the cross section. It's just that kind of relatively low to medium floods before it gets into the wider floodplain. So what the graph is showing really is that water goes over the channel capacity quite often when you look to the records, and it's not unusual to have water overtopping the main channel. And that's where the flood bank systems start to provide benefits. So just to highlight that, yeah, the flood bank really provide benefit well before we get into the higher end of the flood banks.
I'll probably just add that, just to reinforce the point that Jean-Luc makes, that there's a dependency on the structural integrity of that flood bank, even when the water level is lower than the crest, and that occurs many, many times over decades, because this paper is fundamentally about structural integrity.
Cool, thank you. I've given a really good background to Taieri and just highlighting that there is that flood risk there and giving us some good context around where this paper sits and why we're assessing risk for our flood banks. But just to give a little bit more of an overview of things is that, yep, it's the Taieri, it's a low floodplain area. There is a long history of flooding there, and Jean-Luc has explained the dynamic of how often we get significant flows through the channels. It's providing protection to a significantly large area, and there's a mix of stuff that's protected within that area. Predominantly farmland, but there are some townships to consider as well, and of course the Dunedin Airport. So just a bit of context. This diagram we've included here is a bit of a summary now for you guys, just as a highlight. So it is included as an Appendix C within our report as well, but it gives a good context for where we're sitting. So we've had the background to the fact that the Taieri is flood prone, there's risk there. This is giving an indication of our wider program of work that we've got underway there, and letting you know that where we currently sit at the moment is within that red box. So it's within the scheme analysis work program. It's part of that identifying how our scheme's doing now, how safely is it doing that. And there's a bunch of different complex pieces of work that sit within that. This risk assessment has pulled together and answered some of those questions. So we've been looking at pulling together a summary of existing information, testing some of our scheme performance, and ultimately getting a risk assessment of our flood banks. There are other components that will built into that wider picture of how safe our scheme is performing. And then this puts it in the framework of where is that information going, which is that ultimately we're going to need to start answering those questions around how safe do we really want to be with our flood scheme and how do we go about achieving that. So that's sort of just giving some context to the information. So as Michelle mentioned, we do have Tolkien and Taylor online for any specific questions, but I will give a bit of a summary of the risk assessment itself. It focused in on our assets. So it's assessing our flood bank asset, and it assessed the full length of the flood banks within the Lower Taieri scheme. The method of risk assessment we used for this was two components. So understanding the likelihood side, likelihood of failure of our flood banks, and the consequence side. What would happen should those flood banks fail? Then within that, there are several layers of information that inform those two components. So within the likelihood piece, there's things like existing and further information that we got on field condition, intrinsic strength, and some overtopping capacity modelling information. On the consequence side, there was also several layers of information. Part of that included doing flood bank breach modelling and then damage assessments based off that. So this is just to give you a sense of the layers of information that went into compiling the ratings and the scorings for it all. Thing to note here is that it is a mix of some of the existing information appended by further assessments that either ORC did or provided information to Tolkien and Taylor, and then they also did further assessments like the breach modelling. And then Tolkien and Taylor pulled all of that together within a risk scoring to provide the overall rating. This slide gives you a bit more of a visual representation of some of that information that went into making up that assessment. So the map we have there is an example of one of the breach scenarios that was utilised. The breach for this one was breach 2, so it was just downstream of Outram on the Taieri true right bank. There's a little green section you can see. So that's the impact from that scenario, but it gives you an indication of what information we're talking about when we say we assessed consequence. So we looked at breach modelling, we said here is an area that could be affected. Then we said what assets are within that area, how are they affected? And that combined to give us a consequence rating. Then that was combined with things like understanding likelihood. So understanding the different modes of failure we can have within our system, like erosion, roots, seepage, capacity, overtopping. So modelling components were also incorporated. So lots of different factors went into it, but ultimately it's given us a relative assessment of risk associated with flood bank failure.
Excuse me, Liz, so that map there, that's, am I understanding this right, that's one example of the modelling you did with a breach?
Yes, that's correct.
And that would be the results of that.
Yeah, so there were,
Great, thanks.
in this assessment, there were 15 representative locations used across the whole Taieri plain in order to inform different sections and segments of the flood bank.
Right, thank you. Good.
This is the risk rating matrix that was used. So again, just a way of demonstrating those two components, consequence along the top, likelihood along the side, the different layers that went into each of those, and then obviously combining them together for that ultimate risk rating. Here's the summary of our risk ratings from this report. What's important to note here is that the majority of that risk falls within our medium and high, so our mid-range categories. And the other thing to note here is that the overall risk rating, like I said before, is broken down into those two components. The consequence component actually had quite a significant impact on these final risk ratings. So the extremes and very highs you're seeing in there are significantly influenced by that consequence component. There's a bit more of a breakdown of that, those details within the report and some further diagrams.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, Kevin.
Yeah, sorry, was the consequence rating, was that based on the consequence that would have occurred when we designed the scheme that it was designed for, or the consequence now that there's another 500 houses in the spot?
So if you go back to that picture, it's based, so we did the modelling that was done, the next one back, this modelling that was done was just, this is what TNT have just done for us.
Yep.
So it's looking at information now. So it's looking at where the area of extent of flooding could be and what assets are now within that. What it didn't take into account was future development.
Right, so, but it also hasn't taken in what originally it was designed to do. So originally it was designed to, at a certain level, and that protected, say, 20 houses. And if we've allowed the development to go on the other side, all of a sudden now we've got 100 houses that we're, so the consequences change quite dramatically.
Yes, that's correct. So it's taken in current day. Yeah.
Current time, yeah. And has that, I suppose the part that really worries me is that when the TA or us, whoever is allowing those developments to go ahead, are we correctly articulating that the original scheme was designed to protect those 10 houses, and now you put 500 houses here? Well, we need to change things around. Where does that get discussed?
How about we bear that in mind?
Right,
And come back to
okay.
that through at the end of the presentation. Tim, is it a clarification on what, just something we've just heard?
Yes, just
Yep.
clarification on the pie chart that you've got back there. So just looking at that, you've got 51 kilometres of high risk of flood
Yes.
banks. Is that what we're seeing?
Yes.
Okay, so that's pretty significant, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So the next slides will show you spatially where those sections sit. So within the East Taieri, you've got some of the sections around the cutoff bank, and then the true right of the Taieri, and there's some scattered sections kind of under where that Thompson Taylor one is on the Silver Stream as well. And then the west side, which is the next slide, you can see some of those very high and extreme again popping up right down the bottom there through the Waipori area. So spatially, that's where the sort of highest risks sit, but the high risks as well are also quite spread out. But you will notice in comparison, if you just flick back to the east again, you'll notice the difference. So the lows and the mediums are saying you see more of those around the East Taieri section. And if you flip to the West Taieri again, you see these ones are sort of where those high risks are sitting. And this demonstrates a bit more that influence I was saying about consequence, given that the airport is within this lower area. So that's a really high consequence driver for that overall risk rating, which is why we tend to see a lot of those very high and extreme risks sitting down within that West Taieri area. Yeah, so I'll hand over now.
Okay, so what does this mean and what do we do next? So results from TNT assessment don't significantly change our understanding of risk on the Taieri. We know there's a floodplain, we know there's a flood hazard on the Taieri. What it does is allow us to look at our work programs and start targeting areas based on risk. So we're looking to share the report with council and public so that risk is better understood. And it allows us to start identifying sections of where we need to prioritise our work programs. It is important to note that the risk ratings are a relative risk rating. So when we're looking at those ratings and the graph that Elise showed with the risk sitting largely in the centre, that's the nice bell curve of our risk ratings relative to one another. We have got allowance within our infrastructure strategy and draft LTPs, management plans to allow for the work and the forward work programs. There is from here some immediate actions that we're looking at. We do have those two sites that have popped up as extreme risk rating. We've already been out and had a look at those, and we're starting our plans and communications around those two sites to address them. Important to note, even with those two sites, when we do some work to lower the risk around those sites, they will still remain as relatively high risk because of their general location and where they sit within topography. From there, we're going to start triaging and looking at our next layers down and develop our planning work programs from there, working through it as a risk-based approach. Communications, Michelle.
Thank you, team. I thought I'd just finish off quickly with the communication slide. Before the committee meeting today, we did email stakeholders, which are up on the screen there. We were invited by DCC to present to them the same PowerPoint. We are also meeting with the Mosgiel Taieri Community Board tonight. There has been a media release post the committee meeting. We will be holding some public information sessions to talk to the community specifically around the risk assessment. What does it mean? How to interpret it? And we're currently scheduling that for around the 21st February. Social media, we're well supported by comms who are helping us articulate this. Other stakeholders will be advised of the report and have invitations to also attend specific sessions if needed, but also to keep the conversation around risk exposure, having the conversation of risk management and our approach to risk management in the community and for readiness and preparedness as well. We can take some questions now, and also we can have Tonkin and Taylor comment on any aspects that you might feel relevant that you might want to look at.
Thank you very much, and look, thank you for putting that together, and that was really helpful because it dealt with your sort of risk format, the way you've taken into account the likelihood of something happening plus the consequences. Then that spatially, those maps you showed us how that was distributed, and finally talked about the communication and engagement side of it. So that was very good. But we can take some questions now. We will start with Councillor Wilson and Councillor Meffin.
Just checking whether Councillor Malcolm's still going. No, I think.
And I know Councillor Laws has joined us online. So welcome, Councillor Laws.
Thank you. Starting from the last moment and going back with probably because of the order you come, Kiwi Rail aren't considered a stakeholder on the Taieri. I would have thought with their, you've got Wakatohi there, but Kiwi Rail go through that area as well and have its central structures, main front lines.
Yeah, they are a stakeholder. I was not successful in finding a contact for them, but we'll be reaching out to them.
Okay. I'm just flagging that the 21st of February is a date then all the councils will be in Oamaru, and it'll be really sad if we can't have any governance at those meetings in Taieri, but I'm just flagging that. It's whether you want us to.
We felt it really important, thank you, but we felt it really important that we do circle to the community.
Absolutely, you have to go to the community, but doing one date, if you can't do one date, which we won't be able to do, I think it's really hard on the community. I think one date for a community meeting isn't taking that community seriously, and when it's only a fortnight notice, but that's okay. It's just raising that as a concern. The bigger question I have, and it's going back to the capacity of the river and the U shape. In the power presentation that you showed, there's an orange line at that point, which isn't on the one we got yesterday, and makes a lot more sense. That is, just checking, it's the same line that's on the graph beside it, right? That orange line goes across, yeah. Can I just understand, the capacity of the river has changed as the river changes at that point, and just understanding how much of that is set. I've seen that huge area that's been filled in, and we had someone talk at the last community meeting, and I'm not sure what the answer was back to them, because they were going to be told why there were willows planted on what used to look like a ramp up the river, but seemed to be changing the course and the capacity of the river. So there's things that happen there. How does that change or get affected in those graphs? Because that doesn't seem to be taken into effect. The capacity of the river doesn't stay the same all the time. And have we noted any changes as we've done this?
After every large flood, we do
Mhm.
cross-section survey on the Tauri.
Yeah.
And we did one, I think, from memory, the last one was after 2017. And the finding of that was showing that, yeah, the river channel changed with floods, and sometimes it goes up in location and sometimes it goes down. But generally speaking, for the Tauri, it didn't change that much in terms of capacity. And that's something, so we keep monitoring that, and that's built into the model. So the modeling that is done to assess the scheme capacity or the change capacity takes into account cross sections
Mhm.
and the changes that happen in time.
So, so we ensure that there's capacity at 2.5 all of the time. Is that how I read that? 2005?
Yeah, and if we go to that diagram showing all the pieces of work, it's one of, so today is to talk about the risk assessment, but there is a huge program of work, and one of the pieces of work is to evaluate or assess the scheme performance or the capacity of the scheme, include so the channel and also the wider flood bank within the flood banks, how this is going to perform now and in the future with climate change. So that's something part of the wider scheme assessment.
Can I just check that I think on that one question?
Yes, no, that's right. And we're just looking at getting that diagram back up.
Oh, thanks. Okay. So the question, I mean, the system, the scheme works, and the risk is inherently the capacity is a factor of the risk. I mean, the risk, you know, if we allow gravel to build up in there, for example, or if nature requires it, then that's the end result. And so the capacity reduces, the risk becomes higher. Have I got that right? If the capacity reduces, then the in that space, if we, for any reason with gravel, then the risk increases, the natural effect at those points.
Your potential likelihood of, say, overtopping, for example, could increase. It depends on the scale of the change and the cross-section reduction.
And my that was my extra natural built solutions. We've talked about them at long-term plan. We're saying that that's where, you know, Forest and Bird and a whole lot of industry are saying we want to get to that space. This seems like to be more of the same and doesn't factor in natural built solutions. Where is that in the mix?
The next. Just while it's bringing the slide up, this is just dealing with one little bit piece of the bigger program of work. So what this is doing is looking at how our current infrastructure performs under a single reference flood. Those kind of considerations about alternative ways of doing things are part of this larger program that we will be reporting on in the future as we develop that.
But we keep on sinking more money in this process into something that may fail and don't look at, potentially.
I guess the scope of this paper, my understanding is that this is the Tauri flood scheme flood bank risk assessment. And so that's looking, as Dr. Palmer has said, at taking a fairly narrow view of that portion of the scheme. And the questions you're raising, Kate, are a wider one. And I guess this informs our thinking when we get to those wider questions. But we're not looking at that in this paper. However, there's certainly things that we do need to be considering in the bigger picture.
Can I just add to that, just in terms of Kate's comments around sinking money, while we have this infrastructure and the expectation is that it operates in a certain way, I would suggest that the work needs to be carried out to meet that expectation. So it's not, I know you would suggest it's wasted money, but it's not sinking money into something. It needs to occur until a point in time that we decide there's an alternative, and then that is invested in.
Councillor Methven and then Councillor Malcolm.
Just taking you back to the presentation where you've got two sections of the flood bank being identified as extreme risk. Can you take us back to the slide that shows the risk rating? It's a map, the satellite map flood bank section rating. And perhaps just show us where these two areas are, and also what the sort of remedial work is that you're planning, the cost, and whether we've included that in our long-term plan. Yeah.
So, okay, so the two sections of extreme risk, they're in a fairly dark red colour. And yeah, actually, Michelle, maybe put to slide 17.
Page 81, page 82. So if you want to.
Yeah, there they go. So two sections right down by Lake Waipori, or Waipori River. The section in the bottom of the photo on the right it's shown quite large in the diagram, and that's a function of the length of the section. The area that is pushing from the high to the extreme rating is actually quite short, and in that section there is a willow tree which is in the berm but very close to the toe of the floodbank, that we need to remove, and we're getting a plan in place to do that.
Mm-hmm.
The other section is up near the top of the photograph. That is a section of floodbank that effectively ties into Henley Berwick Road, or the road bridge on Henley Berwick Road, up near the confluence of the Contour Channel. It's a relatively short section of bank that tapers down effectively towards that road, and that increases the risk of overtopping at that point. So we're looking at getting a plan in place and work program to address that section as well.
Mm-hmm.
And also, just one thing. Yeah. Also, just keeping in mind that what Brett's talking to is lessening the likelihood side of that equation. So like we were talking about before, the consequence side will still exist. So we're talking about roots and stuff in the flood bank and capacity and overtopping, but the fact that if it overtops, it will still be flooding that area of housing and the airport will always mean that the risk rating there will be quite high, but what we can control in adjusting our works for our asset is around the likelihood part of that equation.
So the timing of the work and the cost?
The removing the tree on the lower section, we're looking to get done within the next few months. The section at the top needs a bit more planning. We need to get some surveying. We're probably going to need some consenting work up there as well. So it makes the timing a little bit more difficult to nail down, but we're planning to get it underway quickly.
Thank you.
Thank you for those explanations, and thank you. That was really helpful having that extra slide to explain that. Councillor Malcolm.
So on page 80, where we have the pie chart, what is our organisational aim for that pie chart to be satisfactory? So how many what percentage do we want in what colour? So what are we seeing as a desired position for our asset?
So what we've identified here is just the risk. It's the first step for us to take these relative assessments and say where we focus on next. Part of that wider steps of saying, raising the question of how safe do we want our scheme to be, and what level of risk do we accept and where and why. That's all part of the next steps assessment. So I guess for now, in terms of work streams, we'll be focusing on what we can actually achieve in adjusting our assets, but there will be a component of needing to work with all of those stakeholders, give them time to adjust, to take in the information that we've provided them, and then work with them to understand what acceptable levels of risk are.
Yeah, thanks. And I just point out that in the paper, sections 49 to 52 have some further discussion around that idea of tolerable risk. Michelle.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add to that. This is a really important exercise as asset managers for council-owned assets that we interrogate our system and push it to its limits. We do that hypothetically, so we can understand where likelihood and consequence will result. So as the team has been talking about, we've modelled over 3,000 QMEX, and it helps inform us in readiness and preparedness what the impacts look like, and that then further falls into our emergency planning and also community readiness. But dealing with the things which Elise talked to quite well, things that we can control, absolutely, that is in our asset management program. This hasn't changed the natural hazards. We're not remapping, we're not changing anything to do with the natural hazard database. This is an exercise in best practice as asset managers. What would our system look like in this likely event? So I just want to put some perspective around that. That helps our planning and also helps us prioritise and ensure that what we're putting together in our infrastructure strategy and our long-term planning, that we're on track. And we are.
Councillor, is this a follow-up?
Yeah, follow-up from
Okay.
that. So, look, and thanks very much for the explanation, and that's really quite powerful. But I suppose in the interim, and look, I haven't seen it, but this willow tree just didn't become a problem in the last day or two. It's taken a while to grow and become a problem. So what have we got in place now to monitor these schemes in the interim until we make those decisions?
We have our operational staff. The willow tree, which may become more famous than the Monica tree, is actually located in a really wonderful marshland where the Waipori River stays fairly saturated, okay? So instead of rushing in to whip it out, we need to actually look at how we're going to remove it and remediate that area. So staying in situ for the now, away from the tow, it's not in the flood bank, is the current situation which staff are monitoring, okay? We're looking to expedite its removal, but again, access and how we actually get that particular tree that's been identified out is part of the methodology we've got to look at. So to answer your question, if we have a flood event, we add this to our risk register of, look, this is another area we've really got to keep an eye on. Absolutely. And how we keep an eye on that is ensuring we don't have obvious signs of seepage or things like that.
Good, thanks, John. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Weir.
I was just going to move the recommendations of.
All right, I think there's a few more questions. We'll come back to you in due course, Councillor Wilson and Councillor Noon.
Sorry, what was a really clear issue. You're talking 3,000 QMEX that you're looking at, and the highest flood that's recorded so far is what?
2.5.
2.5. So this is a 20% increase over and above, which seems quite a lot given the history. And so that's based on best practice to go 20% above?
We've chosen a flood that deliberately stress tests the system. If we chose a lower flood, it just wouldn't stress it enough to show where the problems are. So if you stress it too little, everything looks like it's fine and there's nothing to be done. If you stress it too much, everything fails equally, and that's useless as well. So we're trying to we have picked a flow that is at or above design flood, deliberately to ensure the system will fail in some parts. And so therefore we then get extreme risks and other places where it will withstand that size of flood in the Taieri River. Part of the wider program, though, is to get a better understanding of maximum credible flood and probable maximum flood. We've talked about that before, to understand where would 3,000 cubic sit on that, so that we can understand how the system will perform over a range of floods, and to ensure, hopefully, that we can ensure that it will fail safely under those super design floods.
Yeah, I suppose what I don't want us to be doing in that process, and I think I've gone from A to B too quickly, is that in the methodology, we've tested it at 3,000, but to find the weak points that would happen potentially at 2.5. We're not saying that we're building to a 3,000 cubic flood risk. It's a big difference.
We're not making any presumption about what the flood risk should be. I think what we will endeavour to do ultimately is to get as low as reasonably practicable, which is how dams are managed. There's no legislated standard, if you like. So what we're trying to do is lower the risk profile, change the shape of these graphs to as low as practical, balancing the cost of the investment. And that's a further decision for the council with the community to make in the future with that wider program of work to get that right optimum balance between risk and cost of further investment. But for the moment, we're establishing the relative criticality of our flood bank assets and then directing the current investment to the places where it will make the most difference.
Yeah, it's interesting because if it did breach the 2 points you've suggested at Waihola or Waipori, I can't imagine that the consequences would be that dire. Yeah. No, it goes in, floods in, sorry, rather than floods out. Yeah, sorry, I'm with you now. I'm thinking banks on the wrong side. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for those last two. Councillor Nee.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I had a couple of questions, and sorry if I missed it in the intro, but were there any really standout surprises as a result of the flood bank risk assessment process that, in light of the age of part of the scheme or parts of the scheme, probably the composition of what was used to maybe establish some of the flood banks over time or whatever, was there anything that really stood out? You thought, my God, didn't really think that would have been a result of this process?
I think one of the beautiful things about this piece of work is that it did, as I mentioned before, it brought a summary of some of the existing information we already held. So things like our 2017-18 condition report and assessment, which was done after those floods, that was pulled in as part of the piece as well. And then there was just some further assessments pulled in on top of that. So I think what's been really good about this is that it's highlighted areas we already kind of knew about when we had those, because every time we have a flood, it tests the scheme right and we get more information about how it operates. So it's been good to kind of have that confirmed and have that in a collective report as a summary where we can relatively look at it across the board and say, actually, yeah, these areas that we had in the back of our mind that we were concerned about, yeah, they've popped up here in the report. That's good. So, I mean, it's not, as a whole, I think I can speak to say that it has shown us what we'd mostly expect. And those areas we're concerned about have popped up. Yeah, there've been some smaller locations that have popped up that we've gone, oh yeah, those two, but on the whole, I think that's what we expected to see.
Cool. And my second question is around, obviously this process is being done because we're a infrastructure owner of these flood banks, and this leads into the overall assessment of the flood scheme. But trying to think about the neighbours, whether that's the airport, lifestyle block, dairy farmer, whatever. Is there a responsibility for those individual owners to have some sort of flood management plan on an individual case-by-case basis to ensure that they take responsibility in terms of, I'm talking about and live here really. So does that happen? Or is that something that we advocate, or is there a mandatory responsibility for those neighbours to perhaps, when you're neighbouring such important infrastructure, that they've got to do this anyway?
Yeah, so we work closely with all of the stakeholders, and like anytime we get information like this, we update them and have chats with them. And key stakeholders like the airport, obviously they have their own procedures in place. They know exactly where they sit within the flood scheme. They know the risk that they have, and they have their own operational procedures around that when it comes to things like farmers and the community. So I think it's do great work with working with those in providing information and making sure that people are prepared and that they're doing that on their own, that they're able to do that on their own. So yeah, I think definitely the emphasis is on ensuring that people have their own plans and processes in place to handle the risk within the area that they live.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McCall.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Turn my microphone on. I've got 2 or 3 questions. It's really good work, and I understand that the the outcome, we've got the outcome, which is awesome. We've got a risk-based assessment of flood infrastructure as it stands today, which is really good. I think for myself, the most telling graphic is the very first one, the 1923 flood. Because if you actually go back to that map and that graphic, you'll see that under a natural state, there's a lot smaller area affected by a major flood than what we've actually created with by installing flood banks to protect specific infrastructure. So I just wanted to go back to that one a little bit. And so it goes a little bit back to where Councillor Wilson was saying was, okay, sometimes we're creating sometimes we create issues for ourselves, and sometimes we build things and have unintended consequences that come up. I think it's an awesome report, and I think it's. I've got a few things there I wrote down. I couldn't actually find the section, but in there somewhere around the modelling based at the 3,000 cubics, and I understand that that's as Dr. Palmer said, that's like to get a tree. We need to break it to work out when the effects of a break. So I understand that, but we have to keep when we rate things between higher and extreme is in relation to that break level that we've created. And at the end of the day, there's a statistic somewhere that says that, was based on a 26% chance of there being a breach of that magnitude within 30 years. So we're talking like a really infinite, really small chance. Well, that's like, we're 1 in 100 or whatever. And then it's, and the ratio continues to be only a 40% chance within a 50-year period that you're going to actually test to this level that we're actually going to get this test. But that's all. So I think we just want to keep it in context a little bit, because it looks like quite scary when you use terminology like extreme risk, etc. Like that's extreme risk under an extreme load. So
just a reminder, we were in our questions.
Oh, sorry.
Here too, if you had one there.
Oh, I'll have go to my other questions now. So on the same graph, you look to the top right hand corner, and I just for clarity for myself, you'll see based in 1923, 18. There's one there which I think is really telling, is the 1868 flood dotted line. So, and you'll see the flood area goes all the way up, and I think it's way up and behind Wingatui, etc., etc. Is that correct?
Page is it?
Oh, it's on page. It's not. I couldn't. It's on the slideshow.
This one?
Yeah, that one there.
Yeah, so that's,
you zoom in on it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. That's the
That's
extent.
correct,
But
yeah.
the 1863 or 8 flood was bigger than
Yeah.
1923.
Yeah, and then there's other one. There's another slide somewhere that shows the flow of the water, the height above sea level flowing down, which might be on the other side, is it? But just showing that all the land on the top side of the Taieri River naturally drains to the Taieri River on a natural circumstance, and it involves all the land from north of and up around Wingatui. Is that correct? So it's got a natural drainage pathway down.
Yes, if you look to the east Tari, so on the left-hand side of Tari,
It's on
everything coming from the hills around Tironga Road down to Silver Stream, everything drained towards the Silver Stream and the Tari. And everything on the west Tari will drain from, say, Outram down to the airport, and the little spots that are indicated in dark blue on that.
So yes, it's on a natural world, that land on the east side of the Tari, or the land basically that's in the orange there on that graph, would drain naturally within a pretty small period after a flood. And so the drainage impacts in those areas is basically caused by the flood banks being put in the road. Would that be an assumption?
Thanks, Lloyd. I think we understand that you're pointing out that the modifications that have been made there over many years have in fact affected the drainage patterns on the Taieri.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, so I think we can carry on from there. Look, I noticed in the recommendations, the fourth recommendation is a more specific one about recommending the council endorses the communications with the phase one communications and engagement plan. Just so we know what we're making a decision on, could you run through what that communication and engagement plan would involve again, so we can make a well-informed decision?
It was, oh, sorry. It was, we're meeting with the Taurin Community Board this evening. And we are holding a public information session that's currently set on the 21st, but if that's not appropriate, you can suggest otherwise.
Okay, thank you. I guess, well, yes, councillor Wilson commented that that day councillors would not be available. So if it was possible to investigate something else, that would be a useful thing to do. But that presumably can still be contained within the plan about considering the date.
We're happy to do that,
Yeah.
as long as we can continue to communicate either via media or something to the community, because it may shift into March. That's all. I'm asking for guidance there.
Yeah, I think certainly continued communication is very important, and don't want to prevent that in any way. I don't know if I can make a decision, or we can come up with exactly what we're going to do now without some further thought about what the options would be. Which is a little vague. Anyone suggest the best way forward?
I think we can accommodate that request to review the date.
Right.
Something that's,
So just,
and in the meantime, ensure that we are communicating, and in the meantime, just ensure that we continue communication with the stakeholders and responding to media and other things, because this will, what it already has and will continue to generate some interest.
Yeah, thank you. That sounds good.
Okay, Councillor Somerville, there was a question, I think, before that we didn't get to answer from Councillor Brenner, Malcolm. Was that right? There was one we were going to leave to the end about
No, I'm comfortable.
planning subdivision.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's
Okay.
I'm happy with where you're heading. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Councillor Weir, are you another question, Kate?
Just one question. Thank you for your discussion about the engagement. I know that CEOs push what engagement and consultation means, and I'm just checking while staff, and it's a torturous process, I get this, but if there was a group that was really keen and had lots of people turning up and wanted to meet specifically with you, would that be an option? Are staff available for that sort of thing? And because this is an area that I think people want to engage on, but setting, as I said before, setting one date for a meeting, they can't make that meeting unless, is there capacity or resources for that?
Thank you. That's a hard question. I really need to talk to the team. We do have workloads and deadlines that we still have to work on. So we were quite keen to get a placeholder for at least 2 sessions. However, we will consider any requests and accommodate accordingly where we can.
Thank you. Thanks you very much, Michelle. Now, Councillor Weir, you have expressed an interest in moving those recommendations.
Yeah, I'm happy to move recommendations 1 to 4.
1 to 4. Thank you. Anyone care to second that? Councillor Noon, thank you. Anyone who would like to speak further? We have had a fair amount of discussion during the question session.
I can touch on it briefly. Just that.
Councillor Weir, you got something to say?
Speak to
yes,
it, yeah.
Please do.
Obviously, with this infrastructure, these assets, we've got a responsibility to upkeep them in a way that maintains their function, minimises the risk to the community in the event that the infrastructure does fail. And so the importance of this work is pretty clear, as is the importance of communicating it with the community. I do think there are some really big, tricky, long-term underlying questions in the background here that we're all anticipating for the future, and how we think about the resilience of the lower Tairi going forward, but they're not really questions for today. The first steps of what we're looking at today, looking at these assets in the greater flood scheme of things, doing science and practical work to assess and minimise those present risks, and then communicate that with the community and bring the community to the table. So that once we are there, we can look ahead to those next steps that might be a bit bigger and a bit trickier and a bit more open-ended. But for today, yeah. Cool.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else wish to speak?
Just want to say thank you to Richard and Tim from TNT that we have on the line. We haven't had any specific questions for you, but just as an extra shout out and thank you for you to compiling this report for us.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks. Look, so the recommendations are: 1, that we note the report; 2, note the report by Tonkin and Taylor; 3, notes the program of work underway to reduce the flood risk for Lower Taieri; and 4, recommends council endorses the communications and engagement plan. So look, we'll put all of those recommendations. All those in favour? Aye. Against? So that's carried. Thank you very much. And look, thank you again. We recognise there's a whole lot of work, a whole lot of expertise that goes behind that, and this is one part of a much bigger picture, and that will fit into that to inform those further decisions in the future. So thanks everyone online and everyone in the room who had part of this too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, we move on to paper 8.5, wildfire hazard in Otago. Might need a little change over personnel. And I guess we're moving from water to fire. And this paper is a lot about clarifying responsibilities, and I think it's very responsible that the ORC has brought this issue up where they have seen that there's some gaps or an area of concern. So welcome Matt joining us, and I'll leave it to you three up here to talk to this paper now.
Thank you. So the purpose of the paper really is to trigger the discussion around wildfire and roles and responsibilities. It has a part around the picture today, what the risk in Otago, and a few figures around that. But one thing to note is the figures are for the Otago region as defined by FENS, which is slightly different from the Otago region. So that's something to keep in mind when you're reading the figures.
Probably just to add that national and international events have highlighted interest in this issue. Things feel a bit warmer and we're getting more development in central Otago. So all of those factors considered, it seemed appropriate to bring you a paper on this topic.
Thank you. And I guess the nub of it is that it's not entirely clear where responsibility lies for different things, where there are a number of different agencies responsible here, but who's exactly responsible for that? And so we are recommending that the ORC raises that issue in the conversation in order to clarify that, in order to make all our communities safer in the long run. Have I summarised that reasonably? Yes, thank you. Right. Thank you then. Any questions from councillors who are present or online? Councillor Wheel.
Yeah, sort of a bit more of a higher level question. I was just wondering, in terms of ecological resilience after forest fires and stuff like that, where would responsibility for that lie, do you think? In terms of, restoration of forests that might have been burnt down and coordinating seed dispersal and stuff and managing those.
Can I just maybe how ORC has obligations in terms of maintaining Indigenous biodiversity? If Indigenous biodiversity was lost, I don't know what we might do, but we do have obligations under the RMA in that space broadly. It's a massive question beyond that, but we do have some aspect of responsibility.
Right, but sort of in our biodiversity space, or in our resilience space, do you think?
So it would be in the biodiversity space. So yeah, in terms of the in reading this paper, and Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is around the people and property aspect, and our role in that. But yeah, there was a fair question there about it, and I know you've raised previously what our role might be in responding to in a biodiversity context.
Thanks, Councillor Meffin.
I noticed in the recommendation that we have to note the wildfire risk for Otago and the ORC's responsibilities for that. And I know you've got a detailed report there, but we're this public meeting with people probably streaming in, perhaps. Could you please elaborate what the wildfire risk for Otago is and what our ORC responsibilities are in response?
Just trying to think the best way to respond to that.
It's a big question.
It is, so give me one, so just need to find that. So a lot of the information in the report is relying on FENS, Fire and Emergency New Zealand information. And in terms of risk for the region, they highlighted a few areas where they consider them as hotspots, and those are summarized in paragraph 23. The other key thing to note is around that table. Table 2 and Table 3, which give an idea of the number of fires in the region, split into different districts. And Table 3 is about the number of the type of land use activity affected by fires. And when you look to the number, is the majority for the 2021 fire season, it was around meat and wool areas, conservation areas, and dairy areas. So that's the top 3 areas affected in terms of land surface by wildfire in that fire season 2021. Now, in terms of role and responsibilities, there are different aspects to that. One is ORC, because of our operation, we've got some responsibility around managing our own land and our own activities on land. Apart from that, the RMA, in its definition of natural hazard, includes fire. So there is an element of making sure the information around fire hazard is understood. So that I think from a kind of preparation to understanding the scene. Now, do you want to add something that around our active role in terms of doing an event?
Yeah, I think look, broadly speaking, and looking at fire and disease throughout the country, we've got some of the most at-risk places in the country when you think of the red zone in Queenstown, Mount Iron, Naseby. So we're sitting at the top of the list there. In terms of roles and responsibilities, obviously defining, as Jean-Luc has just said, our responsibilities under the RMA and how we assist councils with their district plans, defining where places are that are safe to build or not. And then you've got the second part, which is the group discussion around the roles and responsibilities across the 4 Rs. So really clearly defined in terms of response within the FENS Act. But when you look at areas such as reduction, readiness and recovery, less clear, and obviously hence the need for discussion. And so why we bring this to your attention today.
Thank you very much, Jean-Luc and Matt. Councillor Wilson.
That's an interesting question, and I don't think I've seen it in here. The response, so our focus is on the environment. Response generally to fire is get it out as quickly as possible. But it's actually what you use to put out the fire can be inappropriate. And I'm just wondering, do we have a planning response that looks at, so Te Papanui, which had a fire in 2019, looked like a mountain fire generally, but what they used probably wasn't in, that they had some concerns very soon thereafter, I think, of what it did to the water catchment area of the Dunedin City's water supply, because that hadn't been mapped and hadn't been considered. And so I'm just wondering if we were really careful about our response, we'd actually have a very good idea about the cause and effect of, you've got a fire and inherently bad, but the way you put it out may depend on what values that area has. Does that make sense? And do we have that layer of responsibility as an environmental agency?
There is, through the chair, there is a proposed rule in the draft plan, but it's about allowing firefighting activities to occur. So that's the predominant focus, even in the plan. I just can't think what exactly the rules is. So there is definitely a framework there. We understand the need to have that water and have that discharge occurring, so it's provided for. But I do hear the concern that you're raising, and I can't.
It's not always just water that's the problem.
No, it's absolutely not. It's the foam. Yeah,
and it's the foam where that wouldn't be appropriate to say over a reserve of the only shape of beetle left in the world.
Thank you. So it sounds as though we haven't got anything clear around that and something to think about for the future. Councillor Noon.
Can I just make a comment on that topic? I don't want to get off topic. But my understanding, there's been changes at central government level around what sort of fire additive suppressant or whatever that can be used this day and age anyway. I think it's relatively recent legislation, maybe in the last 12, 18 months or something like that. If you think it's nasty, I think the thing.
Right. Thanks, Andrew. That's useful to know. Any further questions? Yes, Councillor Malcolm and then Councillor Ross.
On page, click that right, page 166, climate change effects. And when you look at, when we're talking Central Otago, you're saying decreased rainfall. Well, all the readings that I do are actually saying that the rainfall in Central Otago will be increasing because of climate change between 5 and 10%. So with that would obviously mitigate some of that issue. Or is FENS not aware of that?
Yeah, look, it's difficult for me to speak to that. I don't have the level of expertise. I guess some of the compounding issues we have with fuel loading, we have that additional rainfall, there's additional growth and risk that's associated to that as well. But beyond that, I couldn't speak with any.
Right. So a follow-up question to that then. If we look at your chart.
Kevin, just pop your mic
on. Sorry. If we look at your chart, table 2, which lists all the fires, which you'll see a third of those are in North Otago. You don't list North Otago as, and no one's mentioned North Otago as, and I'm not trying to get a plug in for North Otago because we're obviously having some quite difficult problems, but the train of thought of this whole paper doesn't actually recognise that the majority of these fires have actually happened in that North Otago district from the Stoneburn right up to Lake Ohio. And I know some of that is outside our area, but the major forest fire was in Livingston. So yeah, I'd hate to. Yeah, Queenstown's a popular place, but if we want to bring public awareness to this situation, I think we've actually got to portray actually where it is happening, and it seems to be mainly happening in, or a third of it is happening in North Otago region. We're going to the press with this. We're not actually, none of the wording here highlights the fact that it is happening in that North Otago region.
Yeah, I think probably just to reiterate that this information is directly from FENS and the fire indices are from FENS as well. So in terms of the information that's provided and the information particularly around fire indices and risk isn't something that we've led, that's a FENS-led activity.
Okay, so I'll ring FENS directly then, because the information that they've provided is pretty clear to me that a third of the incidents are happening in an area that they're clearly not rating, so they're not even looking after us, are they? I'm just saying, what I'm simply saying, if we're going to go to the public with this, if we're going to go to the public and highlight a problem, the problem is clearly a third of it is happening in that area, so we need to highlight it to those people. And I think that's, yeah, surely as if we are the protectors, if we're having a role in that, we should make sure that that information is being portrayed correctly. And if fans can't portray it correctly, well, perhaps we should be going back to them and telling them, well, please portray it correctly.
It sounds as though some further investigation around North Otago and that information may be worthwhile. And I'm sure we can trust that that will occur, or we will come back to it. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you. Thanks for the paper and bringing the issue bring the issue to our attention. As we bring this to the Civil Defence and Emergency Management Group, I'm just trying to figure out what the discussion might go like, because having a discussion on potential risks or hazards is really good, but generally with most hazards, you've got a number of different responsibilities that all come into the party. So I'm wondering what we're trying to achieve here. What would be the ultimate goal? What would be the output? Would we be trying to come together with some sort of plan together, or would we be looking to an understanding, I suppose, that Civil Defence and Emergency Management was going to manage some reduction, readiness and recovery like we do for a whole range of other hazards? We can raise the issue and have the discussion, but we kind of need to have some sort of sense of where we're aiming to go as well. So have you got any thoughts on that, or we just really do want to just bring that to our attention and then have an open discussion?
Thanks for the question. Look, there's certainly something that we can work through after this, but my suggestion would be some form of resolution / directive to the coordinating executive group, where FENS are a member, to actually work through the roles and responsibilities piece. So there is a defined policy that exists there that we could start putting a bit of a stake in the sand around who owns what.
Yep, good, thank you.
If I could add, it may be that some of those other players have some intentions in regard to this risk. So it's a measure of this initially discovery as to what the others are thinking. And it might be a plan, or it might lead to any of those things you've mentioned, Councillor Robertson.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions here? Yep. So look, the recommendations for this paper, one is that we note the wildfire risk for Otago and ORC's responsibilities associated with managing the risk. Then recommend the council approves the ORC through its membership of the Otago CDEM group, promoting discussion amongst the group on future wildfire risk, including member roles and responsibilities for managing that risk. And finally, request the Safety and Resilience Committee is updated on the Otago CDEM group's discussion at its next meeting. I guess it looks as though we are ready to move on those recommendations. Anyone prepared to move those? Councillor Webb and a seconder. Councillor Malcolm, any further discussion? No, we go this. Let's move those. Oh, yes, sorry, Councillor Kilton.
Yes, thank you. For me, this is a really timely paper because, and I'll turn my thing on so Otago can hear me. For me, it's a really timely paper because when we look, we have a plan. We have a new plan, a land plan that we are putting in place. The risk of wildfire has heightened over possibly the last 10 years. Climate change and potentially increased rainfall will worsen the situation rather than better it. The increased rainfall will just be slightly higher rainfall events, slightly more rain, instead of 5 mils, not 15. We are still going to have this risk. It's going to be drier and hotter. And if I look at this current season that we're in, the risks have been really, really high. And the actions that we will take and what we put forward in our plan potentially could worsen the risk rather than better it. So we look at the Port Hills fire, we look at the Ohau fire, we look at and take those and then look at the risks that sit around Central Otago and North Otago, where we have communities interdispersed amongst dry areas. And yet our council continually works towards lessening availability of water to areas that need it when it's dry. And if our TAs and ourselves are going to consent the ability for people to be living amongst dry areas, then they need the ability to water a curtilage around their house. And our actions, our plans are continually about leaving water in rivers in times when things are dry. We work against storage and we desperately need more storage. The irrigation schemes in Central Otago were the key sources of water that have put out fires in the last few months in very windy, very hot, very dry situations. And the staff and people in those schemes, the providers of water, meant that the fire crews were able to access water really quickly. So we have a huge responsibility sitting here. This paper is highlighting an outcome that has come from actions of our plans. And, when we talk about our air plan, we're immediately talking about, not wanting rural burning. But there are times when burning is very practical and suitable and safe, and it lessens the fire risk at a later time. And then as we move to when there's more and more dry situations, we then put our fire crews and our community at risk. So I think it's really timely, and it does actually highlight to our planning situation that we're currently in, that there are things we should be doing, and step by step taking resources away. We need them to be there for this purpose too. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keller. Any further debate? Councillor Malcolm.
Yeah, just to sum up from is the second. Look, I think it's absolutely important that we do have our roles and responsibilities clearly sorted out without doubt. What I am very nervous of is any abdication of the responsibilities of fire of FENS. They're a government-funded organisation. They're funded by our fire service levies that we all pay if we insure our cars. So they're completely government-funded. I just don't want this process to all of a sudden create a further impost on our ratepayers. And it's critical, yes, that we are seen as a supporter of FENS, but that is their spot. And it will be critical that we stretch them to the limit where they should be putting their funding in as opposed to our ratepayer funding. But I'm very important we have this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. The mover wish to have anything to say on that? No? All right, well, let's put those three recommendations then. All those in favour? Aye. All against? That is carried. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for your work on this and for bringing this topic up. Now, we are moving on to the last paper, just the CDM Partnership Report 2023 to 24, which is an update of a regular report that we receive here. So thank you very much, Jean-Luc. Thank you. So Matt and Gavin are remaining in place. So look, we'll hand over to you two to tell us what you would like before we open up for questions on this. So I guess any significant things, particularly significant things you'd like to highlight here.
I think we'll take it as read, probably just highlight the challenges with maintaining target levels for ECC staffing, but we have a number of things in place to improve that, and it's just a matter of time, I think, until they take full effect. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Have we got any questions from those here? I cannot see any yet. In that case, we may be ready we have one recommendation, which is we note the report. Gary, you're moving that. Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Someone can second that. Councillor Noon will go for. Anyone wish to speak on this paper? In that case, let us move the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much. That was very quick work. Must have been an excellent report. Right, look, that is the end of the agenda, unless I'm missing something. No. So look, thanks everyone for your attendance, your input, your attention, and the work that has gone into bringing those reports about. There was an awful lot of really valuable information and important information about, as I sort of said at the beginning, about risk and how we manage and live with that, and also about how we communicate and engage with our communities around those issues. So we'll just wind up, call it a day for this meeting with a very brief karakia. Kia tau te ranganaria, ki runga I ngā iwi Aotearoa. Peace reign on all peoples of the world. So thank you very much and look forward to seeing you at a future meeting another time.
Richard, what time could we